My name is Chris Livingston. I am the director of the Historical Research Center and Archives at California State University, Bakersfield. And thank you for coming in to interview with us today. I'm with Lorraine Agtang. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, it's Agtang, but everybody says Agtang.
Agtang. Agtang. I want to say it properly. So we're on the campus of Robert F. Kennedy High School here in Delano, California, about 1:45, where I'm going to ask her a few questions. Can you just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about who you are and your connection to today's events?
Great. My name is Lorraine Agtang, heavy on the G's. I was born here in Delano in a small farm labor camp that had 3 families. Like, we were a quarter of a mile from a Filipino male camp, but it was just right out of town. I was the striker in 1965. I was 13 years old, and I'm not sure why we were working, but we were a poor family, and so we were working. Probably was right at the beginning of school. I remember we were working for Giumarra Farms the day that the strike began, and I remember the Manongs coming out and saying, well, brothers and sisters, come and join us. We were working for Salsa Domingo, and I remember my dad saying, and I was wondering, what is all this noise? Who are these people yelling? And my father says, come on, we're leaving. And here I am, a 13-year-old kid. Why are we leaving? My sense of Filipino farm workers is that they're hard workers and they work every opportunity to get. So stopping in the middle of work, it was like mid-morning, was kind of foreign to me. I remember we didn't stay at the picket line because, we were all young, with my siblings and my parents. So we left the field. Little did I know, and I just remember looking out the back window, seeing all the Manongs there, and having that be my first exposure to civil disobedience. I remember all the excitement that was going on in Delano. I mean, it was positive for the farm workers, not so for other people who lived here, because they were challenged by workers wanting to have a union contract. I remember after AWOC and UFOC got together, as kids we used to sneak into Filipino Hall, and that's where they used to meet, and they used to come and eat. And so I'm half Filipino and half Mexican. So for me, it was a kind of, I felt whole to see the 2 groups become one people. We were never good enough to be Mexican because we were half Filipino, and never good enough to be Filipino because you're half Mexican. So it was, it was a very positive thing for me in my life at that age. Yeah.
You hit it on being half Filipino and half Mexican. And this event was, or this strike was all about solidarity, right? And I think that was an important factor, right, in the success. What can you speak a little bit more to what solidarity meant to you at that time, and especially in the context of Filipino and Mexican workers coming together for this common cause?
When I think about the legacy of the union and a contract, there's no way the Filipinos could win that strike by themselves, and they knew that. They came to Caesar and said, join us. Caesar at that point wasn't even ready. He was organizing door by door to get more people solidly hooked into having a union. So, but Caesar also isn't dumb, and he knew that had he not joined with the Filipino brothers at that time, there could never be a time that he could ask them to join when he was ready to make a move to have a contract. So, and the leaders of AWOC and Caesar and Dolores and the farm worker group worked real hard to bring that community together, because historically the growers play them off, divide and conquer, right? He would come to us and say, oh, the Mexicans picked these many boxes today, and I'm sure vice versa, just to get that, anxiety up between the groups of people. So making peace among that group, historically, Delano was very, divided. On the east side you had all the white people. On the west side you had, the Filipinos on one side and the Hispanic community on the other. And they didn't typically hang out together. I grew up in this camp that was on the east side of town, so I went to school with all white kids. There were probably a handful of, I had a Filipino friend and another mestiza friend who lived in the labor camp down from me. So I didn't even grow up around the Hispanics or the Mexicans in school, during school time. But, my family used to hang out with a lot of the Filipino families, so I knew a lot of the kids growing up that way. So that legacy is getting, getting those two groups together. And they would have never succeeded without each other. They're nothing without each other, because nothing would have happened. The success of the Filipinos in Coachella was that they had, 10-week window period to pick their grapes, and so the growers didn't have time to negotiate. So, without concessions of having a union or a contract, they went ahead and agreed to the money. So there was success. They got their money, and they came to Delano. They just couldn't do that here. You got a larger working community, and you have a larger window period to pick grapes. You get all summer. So it wasn't as easy to go to the growers. The growers said no, because they knew that they had another work group that was going to work if they didn't, But sad, same thing in 1973 when the strike ended. I was working in the fields again with Keratin, and people went on to boycott, and that's when I started working with the farm workers. I worked in the clinic. I became the first manager of Agbayani Village, which was a home that they built for the Filipinos, because I knew all the Manongs from the labor camps. I had an uncle. They used to take us all to labor camps. He used to cut hair, so he would go and we'd hang along with him. So when Agbayani opened, I was the only young Filipino that was on staff as a volunteer, and I was Filipino and I knew the Manong. So at the time I thought, gee, I'm 22 years old, managing this retirement center. It was beautiful. The Manongs were happy there. But it was, in retrospect, I think it was because I was young. They wanted the Manongs to be in charge of Agbayani. They didn't want anyone to come in and tell them how they were going to live. They wanted them to choose the way they wanted to live and have someone carry out the things that they wanted done. So, Agbayani was 62-unit home that they had a shared living space with someone else with the bathroom in the middle. They had air conditioning, which they never had in the camps. They had heating, which they never had in the camps. Personal showers. They had their kitchen. They cooked food for them, Filipino food. They had their gardens. They had a living room. They could watch TV and game rooms. That was clean, that was safe. That was theirs, and they could have friends over. Agbayani was built by volunteers from all over California. Many of them Filipino students from Sacramento, from San Francisco, from LA, from San Diego, from everywhere helped build Agbayani on the weekends. So over the years, those people still came back to visit those Manongs. And I see a lot of them now and have contact with them, where they did videos where they're crying in tears, remembering what it was like to be around the Manongs. Shenley Camp is where they stayed before Agbayani opened. So the union had negotiated with Tenco to have a Shenley Camp. And so when the students were in town, they would stay at Shenley Camp. And so they spent their weekends there with the Manongs. And then they went to build Agbayani. So they just had wonderful stories to tell their friends. It impacted occupations that they chose, and many of them in tears just remembering what it was like to be a part of that movement, So, and for me to be a part of the Manong's lives and building, not building Agbayani, but helping them get settled in, They were in a safe place. They had the clinic, if they had, with 24 hours medical service, which is right across the lot there at 40 acres. And then they had the service center who helped the Manongs apply for Social Security and apply for other things that, getting a bank account. Many of the Manongs didn't have bank accounts. Number one, they didn't have cars. So trying to get a ride into town and then to do something they didn't know how to apply for a bank account, many of them, they say, would die, and they had money in their mattresses because they couldn't, they didn't have anything else to do with them. So, it was great to go out and tell them that you have a place to come to now, a place you can live, that it's safe, and you have security, and you have the medical support, and then you have the love of the community. At 40 acres, all the people that worked there, they used to come over and eat lunch and dinner with the Manongs, and we would make sure they paid. But just to be around the brothers, these kids that came from New York and Pennsylvania and all over, some from all over the world, just to be a part of that and be exposed to the movement. Yeah.
So I was talking to Herb earlier today, and he was saying that Agbayani Village was probably one of the most important wins out of the strike. Would you agree?
Yeah, it is. It is one of the important, because it's still there. I mean, the Manongs that lived there have all passed away, and but it's just to go there and say what happened here and who are the people that were here who people don't know anything about. That they took risks to give up the places they lived with no guarantee that they were going to have a place to live, and that being the only income. So they gave up a lot to start the strike, and Agbayani was one of the payoffs for them. Yeah.
I want to make sure we're on time here because I know you're pressed for time. I have one more question for you,
Sure.
if that's okay. And also add your perspective to this, but what message do you think the Manongs would want you to relay to today's youth about that era? And what message would you like to convey as well?
It's a message that I convey now. I do go into high schools and talk to students and go to Asian groups, and I'm a part of the Funds of Sacramento. So when we do community ventures, I do talk about the movement of the Filipinos. And they would want them to know that they represent their community, just like they did, and that they should not be afraid to take a stand, and they should not be afraid to organize, and to organize with their neighbors. I tell young people, you need to know who's in your community, because when it comes to even the success of getting a first contract for farm workers, it wasn't one group of people. It was a group of different people, different nationalities who came together who wanted the same thing. They wanted to be able to send their kids to college. They wanted to have medical care. They wanted to have Social Security and unemployment benefits. When all the laws were written to not support farm workers, that's what they were fighting for. Everything that people got under the Labor Relations Board that cut out farm workers. So that was, Davy and Goliath story, right? And not to be afraid, and to remember to always organize. One thing, the Asian community, starting with Robert Bonta, and there's a few other Asian people that are beginning to run, but for them not to be afraid to run for like a school board. You started the school board, and then you work your way up, to mayor, and that's one of the successes that Caesar had. Was if you look at the legislature, the majority of Hispanics is like huge, a quarter or half, but in 1965, they were all white,
Right.
and they were growers,
Yeah.
making laws to protect their property and their money. So we know that can happen, and talking to young Asian kids about running, not being afraid, Yes.
That's excellent. Well, is there anything you'd like to add at this point, or?
Just that, my life is just to continue telling that story, because it's our responsibility to tell our story. For a long time, people would blame farm workers, and I says I was involved in farm workers. They didn't write about me, and I have many other friends, and I says this story, our stories should be told by us, because no one else can tell our stories better than us, and we can't count on other people to do it because it won't happen. It won't happen.
Thank you for sharing your experience with me, and thank you for the struggle you endured to make conditions better for our future. So I'm going to go ahead and end the interview, but thank you once again.
Oh, and thank you for taking the time to interview me.